firstly, how do you do it? That's what I don't. You've been at it for many decades now. And where do you find the motivation to keep going on in all multiple industries? I was reading again about you, from toothbrushes to cable to entertainment, and now, of course, Upgrad, where you're the co-founder. How do you do it?
There's no formula. I think the most important one that keeps me going, I think, is self-conviction. And I think that's the momentum that gets me going. The other part, I think, is I've lived my life with a very strong creative function. And I think that's kept my left brain, right brain very, very active. And I think that keeps me very involved. The movie industry and the media industry, which I got into very early, taught me the absolute love and passion with which you create something out of nothing. And I think that actually is a very much the DNA of an entrepreneur.
You know, I'll segue into this. The future of content is always in question. And with ChatGPT, I think content producers are becoming even more in question. Like, I mean, our writers going to get replaced, or our entire industry is going to go away because of ChatGPT. But the value of content is stronger than ever. Mr. Shetty was talking about how content needs to improve. So what is your take now in today's day and age of AI and generative AI? Where do you think content stands?
I think ChatGPT is fabulous, but I think like everything else, let's not overrate anything that comes in. I think then the herd mentality starts in there, and it doesn't have a good ending. I want to tell you that. I think there's an incredible sense in that. There's a good push to that. It'll help a few sectors. It'll get everyone going. And it's getting our imagination going. So I think ChatGPT is sparking our imagination right now. And I think that's what we can take it forward. I would say it's a great catalyst. It can't be the end result. If people are starting to build this as an end result, it will be difficult. Understanding consumers is becoming the most important thing. And I can say that to a lot of people here, not just an audience from a media point of view, but just understanding the consumer. And I think we're flawed in our approach because today, one of the biggest challenges for leadership is how fragile the world is, right? Everything is changing at such a fast pace. How are you all as leaders going to be able to react to a fragile world is going to be very, very critical and important. And therefore, the best way is you have to revalidate understanding consumers. And by the time we start up and we think this is who I want to do it for, 6 months later, it's a very different consumer set. And if you don't keep pace with that, that's not going to be the success of any business.
So what do you think is the hallmark of a good leader and a good team and eventually an organization?
At the end of the day, when you're carrying people, it's very, very important that there's a very strong sense of open communication and a very strong sense of being able to share visions. And I think I come from that. In my entrepreneurial journey, for 2 years, I was an employee. I built a media company, sold it to Walt Disney, and for 2 years, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed it because I had a boss for the first time in my life at that point. And then I remember going to the person I reported to, and Bob Iger was the CEO of Disney at that time. He says, look, have you got everything? We'll let you doing what you want to do. Why do you want to go? And I repeated the same line to him that I repeated to my dad 25 years back, saying, I just don't think I can implement somebody else's vision. I didn't find it exciting to build a Disney brand in India. I wanted to, at that stage, build my own brand. And I think that's the DNA that you need to get when people are building a team. Second, I think we kind of always say we need to hire smarter people than ourselves, but then we need to let that happen and empower people. And I think we kind of miss that. We think we're hiring a lot of smarter people, but everyone is not there at day one. It's like saying, how do you identify a big idea? I said, there is no such thing as a big idea. You have to make an idea big. Any idea at any given stage, there is no such thing. So I think that is really the process. So I think if you can continue to inspire, you're going to be able to attract an incredible team of people.
You've spoken very candidly about how there have been times when things haven't gone as well as you expected them to. So how do you deal with failure?
See, firstly, I think this failure is a very big word. I think we make it a lot bigger than what it is. Elon Musk's rocket exploded in 4 minutes. Is that a failure? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's one of the journeys. He's still far way ahead than anything else that Virgin wanted to do and so many others in that context. So I think we kind of attribute failure as that doctor that says you got cancer and then you think it's terminal. But 60% of the people fight it through and they recover and they get going. And I think that's the DNA that I think we need to look at and go. Personally, I feel that one of the biggest failures for people is indecision because it's got no accountability. Not taking a decision sometimes is one of the biggest failures, and I think it's very underrated because actually it doesn't have an accountability. If you didn't do it, you're not going to be pointed a finger for, but you have no idea what the missed opportunities are. So if somebody asked me what are some of my biggest failures, I said, well, I've been indecisive.
And in terms of your inflection points, like if you look back at your journey, if you had to pick a couple of inflection points, what would you call them?
Think progressively as you go forward, that's what you really need to push. And I think inflection points for me in cable were exactly that. Finally, the building I was staying in, I went door to door to each of my residents, convinced them. And I think the first cable TV connection in the whole of India started at Maker Towers H, where I used to stay in Cuff Parade. And from there, actually, the entire sector grew. My inflection point in media, for example, is when I moved from being a B2B model. First 6 years, one built a media company only on being B2B, meaning transactionally creating television shows for people, dubbing for the Walt Disney Company, creating airline programs, building a studio and renting it by the hour. And then one fine day I said, I'm not going to be able to build a brand. I'm not going to be able to build value. I'm not going to be able to build wealth unless I move to a B2C environment. And I think that was an inflection point with tons and tons and tons of failures.
So making the journey from being a very successful exited media entrepreneur, how did you enter the world of edtech?
Now, the normal reflection for most people is, should I start and do the second act of the same thing, or should I start my second innings? And I chose to start a second innings and not a second act, because I think being successful in a second act is very, very tough. Being possibly successful in a second innings, which is starting something completely radically different. So that was my first thing, that I wanted to roll up my sleeves. I wanted to build something all over again for the next 15 years. I wanted to focus on it from that perspective, and what would I need to do? So I looked at 2-3 sectors, but education came. And I think like everything else that works in life, serendipity plays a role, right? I think when we were at that stage starting our not-for-profit foundation, Swadesh Foundation that we had, and this, I was just for a year meeting people time and time again. I felt this is something I want to do for the next 10 to 15 years. And then you bring in co-founders, and actually then you crystallize a vision.
Serendipity does play, and I like this idea of your second inning should be different from your first.
Just to say that, I do want to say as one learning. Most people expect you that when you finish something, you've worked with a lot of people in your life, let's bring them back. I don't want somebody finishing my sentence. What am I going to learn? Something new. So I would urge a lot of people here, whatever you're doing, this context of I'm comfortable with people and then let's bring together, because there's 8 billion people. And we're now the most population. I'm sure we can find new people and new talent. So that constant reinventing yourself is actually 10 times better than getting into a comfort zone.
Taking the founder's lens, how can a founder manage the board well? What would you suggest?
Most of the people are asking, what's your runaway? What's your next round of funding? So the founder's not really getting anything else. So I would say if you want to do that from day one, get a few independent directors also on your board, along with your financial investors. I know it sounds like a crowd anyway there, but if you've got them, it's going to be very important because you need different mindsets. And I think a board is there to challenge you, then obviously add value. So to me, I think that's really what we need to do. And I think for founders, yes, the major challenge seems to be, I've got 3 different diverse investors with 3 different people, and how do I manage their expectations of what they want to do? And it becomes a very blinkered approach. I think the best way to do that is to have side time with your investors, tell them exactly how you're thinking, prepare that out, and see what strengths they can bring to the table, so that at the board meeting, it's a lot more broader conversation.
And my last question, something you wish you knew when you were just starting out?
Something I wish I knew, or maybe something I wish people had told me was the importance of focus and the importance of doing less for more. And I think I only realized that at a very late stage. I think that if I had learned how important and critical focus is, where you can build really much larger with that, because I think most of us hit glass ceilings, and glass ceilings are meant to be broken. That's why they call it glass ceiling. It's not a concrete ceiling. And how do you break that? I think if somebody would have told me how important focus was in my first 20 years of my life, I think it would have made a big difference to me.
Thank you so much, Ronnie. I think you will continue to inspire us for many, many more decades to come. Thank you so much.